Yeah,
Okay.
I just have a topical outline. I was going to go over and kind of guide the discussion, get you guys talking and stuff like that. But
Sounds good.
Excellent, cool. So I guess we're going to do real quick is just give a brief introduction of kind of who we are and what the exchange space is about. And I figure that Jordan, you have a background in a lot of the psychology behind these things, and Michael Rectenwald has a background in the etymology and the history of leftist ideas, and that might make for a good conversation for however long, maybe 20 minutes, and then we're just going to go some details about what exchange spaces can be and how it can be replicated and kind of where we go from there. And then we could just brainstorm a bit and see if we could talk about a platform for all the different professors to kind of come together and for different people with different backgrounds to help build this toolkit for campuses in a way that can be replicated. So just real quick, my background is I've always been a lover of science, but it's predominantly military, including special warfare, language, and culture. So, for example, in Afghanistan, we'd understand how to work through the medium of culture, language, and sit down and drink tea with people, including with some of our enemies. This included Taliban and warlords and people like that. So we talked to the tribal elders. When we were in Iraq, I did something called psychological operations. So we understood to facilitate dialogue. And then I got back, and I was very jaded by how divided the country was. So I was looking at ways to bring better conversation between Americans and get them talking to each other. And I looked at a lot of the research on moral psychology, and I did something called participatory mapping, which is how to understand and listen to the voices of people, including the marginalized. And so we're essentially started looking at ways to bring these tools to our communities and to our campuses. Sort of the thing, like, think of it as the non-lethal tools of counterinsurgency and tribal engagement. We feel that can really complement a lot of these other things. And I guess I'll let Rectenwald talk about his background as well. I'm sure you're familiar with him, but...
Well, he might not be so much as I am his, but
well, I followed your story, but yes, some update would be just fine as far as I'm concerned.
Okay.
John, is there any possibility that on your camera you could increase the brightness, because you're quite a bit in shadow?
Yeah, I not trying to be shady in a literal sense. I'm in my room, so I live in a little Chinatown apartment in Manhattan. I got my window open. I could try to. I could see if help at all.
Can you, if you go onto tools in Skype, options, video, often there's a webcam settings thing there that'll enable you to brighten your camera up a little bit.
Great. Let me try that real quick. This should.
Tools, options.
All right, hang on.
Video settings.
Settings. Emoticons, emojis, let's see. Video calls, video quality.
Video quality might be it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's not crucial, but Michael and I are much more in the light, and so.
Yeah, I look a little bit, let me see.
Look like you're up to something.
He has to be masked, perhaps. We know he's masked, but we need to unmask you to some extent here.
Yeah. Sorry about that. I mean, my light's on and everything. I'm just in a really,
That's
I got
okay. Let's see now. That's
Yeah.
probably a little better anyway.
That's a little better. Just stop moving so much.
Yeah, that's better. That's better. The shadow in your face isn't quite as intense now. So okay, so let's go with that.
Okay, so
sure.
Jordan, you probably I know you heard a bit about the story and how it came about in terms of I had set up this Twitter account, and it was called the Anti-PC NYU Prof. I had reached a tipping point over a number of issues, and I felt like I couldn't hold back. I set it up anonymously. Within several weeks, I was contacted by an NYU student newspaper reporter who wanted to interview me. I agreed to be interviewed. Wasn't sure I would go on the record as myself. After I gave the interview, I didn't think I'd said anything objectionable, and I let it run with my name and a face of myself laughing, which sort of added some irreverence to the already apostate position that I'd put myself in. And all hell broke loose within 2 days of the interview appearing. There was an open letter from a committee denouncing me in the most strident terms. I was called into the office of my dean, and unannounced to me. So was the head of human resources of there. They strongly suggested I take a leave of absence, and then they tried to pretend like it was my idea whenever they'd set up the meeting in the first place, and I had never even thought about it. And then, the story...
What were the grounds for them suggesting that you take a leave of absence?
They said...
opinions?
Yeah, they said that more than one person, in fact, two persons among the staff had suggested that my Twitter account and my interview represented a quote-unquote cry for help. Meanwhile, when I walked into the office of the dean, the very first thing he said to me as he pulled me 6 inches away from his face, I want you to know this meeting has nothing to do with your Twitter account or the interview. Within 5 minutes, it was brought up that the interview and the Twitter account were seen by somebody as a cry for help. So they suggested I take an immediate leave of absence, turn over my classes to somebody else, be alleviated from all my duties, and so on and so forth. And little of the backstory is that I had applied for promotion to full professor about 6 months before and was waiting on that. So their suggestion that I take a leave was both an affront personally and professionally, but at the same time represented a sort of threat that if I didn't, perhaps my position would be jeopardized. I'm not a tenure track faculty, although we have rank. So I took the leave. The moment I got out of that meeting, I got a call from the New York Post reporter, and I told her what happened, and she said, I asked her, what do you think? The interview, then this leave of absence, and she told me about this open letter, which I hadn't heard about. And she said, there's no coincidence here. These are connected, and you're being punished. There's no doubt about it. I've never seen anything like it. That's not what it looks like. I'm a reporter for 12 years or whatever. I know how things work. This is definitely what's happening. So I went on.
So why was your Twitter account and the interview, do you suppose, regarded as a cry for help precisely?
Because I said things that they thought I must be crazy to say. In other words, to criticize social justice ideology and PC authoritarianism, which is all I did. And
right. So that was I see. So that was interpreted essentially as the beginning, the warning signs of dawning mental illness.
Yes, exactly right. And
so that's very cute.
And in the letter that was put together within 48 hours, that included like 5 or 6 faculty members, 2 administrators, 2 deans, and several students, they denounced me stridently, suggested I'd gaslighted them, suggested that I had no evidence for what I was saying, suggested I had run these ad hominem attacks on them. I never mentioned a single person by name. I never pointed out a single individual. My entire critique was leveled at the institutional and cultural levels. I suggested, that what was happening culturally I thought was crazy. These bias reporting hotlines, these
yeah, those are fun.
No platforming of speakers, the safe space talk.
Of those 3, the bias reporting I think is the most egregious. That's just beyond comprehension. I mean, the other ones you can at least understand to some degree because it's an attempt by people to shut down opinions that they regard as incorrect. I'm not agreeing with it, but I can understand it. But
right.
To set up bias reporting services for students to report their offense just strikes me. I just can't imagine what kind of imagination you'd have to have in order to think that that was a good idea.
Yeah, I said that it set up a culture in which everybody was encouraged to become a sentinel of surveillance. And, it was a panoptical situation. It was like everyone now is looking at each other suspiciously. Everyone is liable to be called out for a microaggression or some other.
Well, the other thing, too, is you don't need a lot of psychological experience to understand and I'm speaking very seriously about this, is that a system like that will immediately be misused by exactly the sort of people that you would not want to have misuse it. So anybody with a grudge, anybody who's willing to use an oppressive bureaucracy as a weapon, you're weaponizing people you are weaponizing people who would be willing to use an administrative bureaucracy as a tool to defeat someone with whom they've had a disagreement, or even a negative casual encounter. And
right.
There's at least 2% of the population or 3% of the population has the kind of psychopathology that would use that tool instantaneously.
Instantly.
And there seems to be no comprehension whatsoever on the part of the people who set these systems up that anybody could even conceivably misuse them, which is also something just makes my jaw drop.
The thing, one of the things right before the semester began, after our syllabi were due to the staff, they were due to be in, they asked us to add another item, and that was, in fact, the bias reporting hotline,
yes.
inclusive of a phone number and an email address. So giving them these various ways to respond. And then there was talk that they might institute an app for the phone so that all you had to do was download the app on the phone, instantly touch the app if you see an infraction, make the report right there in real time through these apps.
To add that to the syllabi, that's also just absolutely beyond comprehension. It's talk about a time to start beating the administration back. So that's the time. Stay the hell out of our syllabi.
That really alarmed me. And then
that's for sure.
There had been we had these symposiums at the end of the semesters where we had these topics, and we were obligated to attend, all full-time faculty. And the last one was about social justice, and the dean, who had once scoffed at the idea of trigger warnings on syllabi, was now floating the idea seriously as a requirement. So the whole thing, I saw this was permeating and taking residence at NYU in a way that I couldn't believe, and I couldn't sit back and listen to or observe.
I've talked to other clinical psychologists about this, like top-rate clinical psychologists, and the people that I've spoken with are quite clear about this. If you need trigger warnings on your syllabi, then you have mental health problems that are serious enough so that you should consider not attending university and seeking counseling.
Exactly.
It's as straightforward as that. And the idea that protecting students by producing such material as trigger warnings and shielding them from things that are going to make them anxious, the idea that will improve their mental health is certainly not an idea that was ever dreamed up by any clinical psychologist worth his or her salt, because it's exactly the opposite of what you do.
Exactly.
So
the other thing I said about it was that the trigger warnings were they were talking about the trigger warnings in a sense of not only mandating them, but also I don't remember exactly what. I'll get to that later.
Yep.
I kind of lost my train of thought there. Sorry.
No problem.
It'll come back to me. So that was the story. It went viral. In the interim, I got the promotion on the day before the election of Donald Trump. I got a notice that I was promoted to full professor with a raise that was retroactive to September 1st.
Well, congratulations on that. That's a big deal.
Yeah. And I thought, well, this is good. And the media was like, you won and all that. But, I've paid a price of complete and utter and total ostracization in my department. I've been in group emails to official NYU listservs. Faculty members have called me every name that you can imagine and worse. And I've never spoken about a single individual personally, never made a single ad hominem attack. I've never singled out one person, but they called me everything. And it's not even necessary to go into the things that they said.
So what exactly, okay, two questions. What exactly is it that they're so irritated about in relationship to you? And second, what's this been like for you? Like, how are you coping with this personally? How has this played out for you? It's been a few months now since this has all happened. And obviously your job is intact and you got your promotion and you've made a point. That's the other thing. You certainly have made a point. So when you look back over this, what do you conclude and where are you now?
Well, right now, the interesting thing is, like, about a week or 10 days ago, I made a tweet suggesting that I had the offings of a book contract were on the way, a commercial book contract, and that comes with an advance. And one of the fierce opponents or enemies or interlocutors got a hold of that, took that tweet and used it as this sarcastic sniping beginning of an email barrage, suggesting that I was on the verge of becoming a public figure at the expense of them and women and feminism and diversity and women of color and
it's pretty spectacularly evil of you to have come up with all this in your spare time. Go after the social justice warriors with the Twitter account and then parlay that into a book offer, man. That's pretty predatory and psychopathic.
I mean, they make me out to be a mastermind,
Yeah, but absolutely. Well, that is a mastermind. If you could pull that off and have planned it, that would really be something.
But the interesting thing is that in those emails, I've never, of course, returned with the same sort of vitriol or ad hominem remarks, and I stayed totally cool. And then in the process of bullying me, harassing me, libeling me, and defaming me, they said that I was bullying them, libeling them, right, harassing them, and abusing them.
Right.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, it's quite a remarkable spectacle, all things considered. But you obviously, put your finger on a sore spot, let's say.
Yeah.
So what has this made you think about this current and potential future state of the university?
Well, here's the weird thing.
I don't mean NYU specifically, but even more generally.
I mean, the weird thing is, Jordan, that my whole background, was in literary and cultural theory. Okay, these are the precursors. These are the theoretical roots of the entire thing.
Right.
So I studied every form of postmodern theory, post-structuralism, psychoanalytic feminism, Lacanian psychoanalysis, all of it. I've studied it all. So it's made me see how the roots of this have come, they have, now they've sprouted, and these are easily connected to the epistemological and identity and other types of claims that were made in the context of this literary and cultural theory, all of it incubated in English departments. So that's what I'm tracing all of that in my book, but I'm doing it through a personal narrative. I think for me...
Have you read Stephen Hick's book, Explaining Postmodernism?
Yeah.
Okay.
I love it.
Because it's very clearly written, very nice.
I'm trying to be as clear as possible. I'm trying to take the layperson through the education that I went through, from the very naive standpoint that I began. Because when I went back to graduate school, I was 33 years old, I had 3 children. My idea was I want to go have a life of the mind, have a real engagement with ideas and blah, blah, blah. I had no idea that in the interim, between my BA and MA and PhD studies, this entire invasion had taken place in the Academy of Theory, and cultural studies and all that. So I was just like, wow. And
I know, it's hard to believe.
It was hard to believe.
I think you put your finger on it, too, when you talked about the causal role that English departments played. We could put our finger squarely on Yale.
Yes.
Because there was the Yale English department that I wouldn't say caused this precisely, but they were the major conduit for those damned French intellectual ideas that have perverted the entire humanities.
Yeah, they were the conduit for Derrida and Lacan, and of course Foucault, who's not as egregious as the others. Sometimes I think he had.
Well, the funny thing about Foucault is that you can actually read Foucault.
Yeah.
But most of what I've read of Foucault is just self-evident.
Yeah.
Like his claim that the categories that psychiatrists use to diagnose their clientele, their patients, are social constructs. It's like any bloody psychiatrist worth his salt knows that if he's educated at all beyond just the narrow outlines of the DSM-5. I mean, that's been known forever. So Foucault strikes... I mean, I've actually enjoyed reading some of Foucault's books, although I've never for a second thought of him as a revolutionary thinker. I think at best he's a third-rate thinker, and I mean that actually in a rather... what would you say, complimentary manner.
Yeah.
Third rate's not too bad.
Not bad,
200 rates.
Yeah, I'd like to register it all. Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah.
Yeah, right. He's kind of an interesting sociological commentator and kind of an interesting historian, because he looks at elements of history that people don't often attend to. I thought he was personally reprehensible, and I don't agree with the damn thing that he concludes fundamentally. But,
right. He's
a lot more comprehensible than Lacan, for example.
Yeah, I watched the debate.
Charlatan.
Oh yes, absolutely. But if you watch the debate between Foucault and Chomsky, you see him paint himself into this corner of the regimes of knowledge and power, such that he must himself necessarily be implicated in such a regime. So how therefore can he possibly be step outside of it for any from any standpoint to be able to critique it? So he's part of it. So therefore he has no way out, and he's basically
the way I've thought about that a lot over the last year, but my estimation is that postmodernism goes nowhere on its own. It's a dead machine.
Mm-hmm.
Because of exactly that. It criticizes all stances. It's okay,
right.
All right, fine. Criticize all stances. You got no motive power.
Right.
So what do? Well, use it as a mask for your neo-Marxism.
Mm-hmm.
And then the neo-Marxism has all the motive power moving forward.
Mm-hmm.
Then you get irritated at people when they say, "Hey, wait a second. How in the world can you be a postmodernist and a neo-Marxist at the same time? You can't do both of those things at the same time." The postmodernism was just a front.
Right. So, the postmodernist epistemology of utter and total relativism, and I call it a solipsistic epistemology, whereby you can't possibly have access to my knowledge. It's inaccessible to you. I'm the only one that has access to it, and you can't even understand it. So it's a kind of encapsulated knowledge that is impenetrable to others. Therefore, it's not knowledge in the sense that we really understand knowledge.
Right.
Then they take that radical and total relativism and turn it into an authoritarian standpoint.
Yes.
It's very curious.
Which is the original motive.
Right.
Because, it's also one of the things I really found interesting about both Derrida and Foucault is their absolute insistence that power is the fundamental motivator.
Right.
And I thought, well, that's pretty strange, because obviously it's untrue. Power is a powerful motivator. Let's make no mistake about that. And people jockey for hierarchical position, although whether or not they actually jockey for power in hierarchical positions is not clear. I think it's only degenerate hierarchies that are based on power. But there's sex, there's hunger, there's companionship, there's love, there's family, there's interest, there's aesthetics, there's all these other.
How about truth as well? Truth.
Justice, we could go with that.
Some of us actually have an interest in finding out what might be right or true.
Yes. Well, obviously there's a very large number of fundamental motivations. And so the question, at least in part, is why the hell did the postmodernists insist upon power as not only as the primary motivation, but really as the only motivation? And I think that part of the reason, especially given that epistemological insecurity that you just described, is because if power is the only actual motivation, then it's perfectly reasonable to use nothing but power to obtain your ends.
Right.
And
exactly.
So there's so much of this that's underground and corrupt that it's almost beyond imagining.
What I don't like
you got a good taste of that.
Oh, I got it. And the insidious will to power, the surreptitious and inversion, hierarchy inversion that's underway. Basically they set up this hierarchy, and whoever's at the bottom, of course, becomes the one at the top. And with this inverted hierarchy, those who occupy the SJW top, they have moral, they have epistemological, and they have rhetorical rights that nobody else has. It's just unbelievable.
Yeah, it is. It's an unfolding miracle of sorts that this has actually occurred, and that people have got away with it too. Because I think what's happened partly in the universities is that the serious disciplines have regarded this sort of stuff as beneath contempt.
Yeah.
They just don't attend to it. It's like, oh yeah, you guys, you go off in the corner and play your sociological games. Like, we'll do the real science over here, which is really what I think has been happening. But what happened is that, the real scholars, let's say, were ignoring people who were pursuing this ideological path. They bloody well took over the universities, and that's really not cute. Now they're going after the real scholars as well. So especially, they're going to really go after the biologists next. They're starting to do that.
Anybody that mentions the word evolution in the context of gender in any sense is immediately a pariah. I mean, it's just
well, in Canada now we have federal legislation that's predicated on the idea that biological sex, gender identity, gender expression, and sexual proclivity vary independently. That's actually written into our bloody legal code now. I mean, it's in the policy doctrines, not right in the legislation.
Right.
It doesn't matter. And what's so comical about that, I think, so insanely comical, is that the best argument that the gay crowd and the transsexuals had for 50 years while they were pursuing their civil rights was that they were biologically different.
Yes.
Like, okay, well, now you've just dispensed with that from a policy perspective. You think that isn't going to have repercussions?
Right.
It's so... Well, but coherency is not part of the policy.
Now, I've traced this to a stance in science studies, and I'm sure you're aware of that field because it became the hotspot of the Sokol hoax and all that, where this radical constructivism suggested that there's no relationship between our theories about the world and the world itself. This is a pure social idealism. There's no real constraints of the world on our perception, so therefore we can willy-nilly make gender into whatever the hell we want it to be based on words.
The critical issue right there is that you put your finger on the critical issue, which is because there's no connection to any underlying factual realm, let's say, of any sort, we can do whatever we want. And that reminds me of the old totalitarian ideas, that was, well, we'll just wipe the slate clean. That was Mao's idea. We'll just wipe the slate clean and produce the new socialist man in our image, right? Because human beings are completely malleable, and the state can turn them into anything they want. There's an unbelievable drive for power underneath that claim as well, a totalitarian drive for power that's just beyond belief.
Yeah, I mean, it strikes me as very similar to Lysenkoism and the the unbelievable claims that were made as against, genetic inheritance and stuff like that. It's just beyond belief.
It's pretty funny that that's happening at exactly the same time that in the biological sciences, the causal role of genetic factors is becoming more and more thoroughly delineated. So it's going to be very frustrating for the social constructionists to find out just exactly how wrong they are. And it's no wonder that they're turning to legislative fiat to win a war that they can't win in the realm of ideas.
And in the United States, in the universities, they have permeated and they have infiltrated the policies of academia. So their language is now the official vocabulary of academic policy.
That's exactly why I wouldn't use those damn pronouns.
Yes.
It had nothing to do. It had nothing to do with the transgender issue, except very peripherally. It's like there's not a hope in hell that I'm going to speak postmodernist language. Not a chance. I can't tolerate that.
It's funny you mentioned the pronoun thing because that was my tipping point. There was a kid the University of Michigan allowed their students in early September to input whatever pronouns they wanted into their profiles. They could go online and put their pronouns in, anything, make it up, whatever they wanted. So this one kid, I thought it was brilliant. He called himself His Majesty.
Yeah.
And all I did is post the story on Facebook.
That's right. That's where it started. Yes, I remember.
When I posted that story on Facebook without comment, and then I went to teach 3 classes. By the time those classes were over, there was a pandemonium that was completely out of control. I couldn't believe it. I was, being blocked and defriended and accused of transphobia and discursive violence and every other thing you can imagine within, and it was over, I mean, so I had a huge purge, or they purged me. I don't know. It went both ways.
One of the things we might point out to the people who will be listening to this is that is some rules for coping with this and for strategizing. So I've got a couple.
Good.
The first is you're going to be called every name in the book. Okay, don't let that phase you.
Right.
That'll pass as long as you don't start apologizing. Do not apologize.
Right.
Hold your course, because you're actually dealing with a mob and you can't apologize to a mob. You can make peace with an individual and move forward, but because the mob shifts on you too, it isn't even the same people from moment to moment. They're not interested in your apology, and they're not interested in all the good things you've done in your life. And if you apologize, what that means to the mob is that you actually made a mistake and that you should be taken down even farther.
Exactly.
So stick to your guns and ride it through. And what you'll find is that you do get through it, and that the people who go after you with all those pejorative terms, as long as you don't back off and allow through action to indicate that you've been properly categorized, they'll give up and run off soon enough. It takes a while, like it'll take a couple of months, but
yeah.
you can, if you hold your position, you can weave your way through it. So that's really useful to know.
Okay, that's one. Do you have any others you would pass on at this moment? Or?
Don't underestimate the degree to which the things that you're thinking are being thought by other people who won't say them.
Yes.
Including your own faculty members. Like I've had plenty of people in the university come up to me and say, we really support what you're doing, but we're afraid to say anything about it. So, and I would say that's the majority of people who are in that position. This is a tiny minority of well-organized troublemakers.
Zealots, yeah.
Who are all united by this pathological postmodern doctrine. And so they don't speak for they may not even speak for the majority of academics, but they certainly don't speak for even a small minority of the general public.
Right.
So if you can get the story out beyond the confines of the idiot academy, then the probability that you'll find yourself speaking what many, many, many people are thinking is extraordinarily high.
Yes, I found that bringing social pressure from outside the academy and media attention from outside the academy was the only thing that saved me.
Yeah, same thing happened to me. And I mean, one of the things I did that happened to work out really well was just read everything that the university sent me. Now, the university is, I want to be very careful in my description of the university, because what happened was the university administrators got a lot of letters and a lot of noise from the SJW types when I first made my videos criticizing this bill, C-16, that finally did pass in Canada a week ago or so. And the SJWs went after me like mad, and 200 faculty members signed a letter telling me that I was making the campus unsafe and calling me a transphobe and a bigot and a racist. I don't know where the hell that came from.
And it all goes together.
Well, I criticized two of the people who ran Black Lives Matter in Toronto, who happened to be very unsavory people.
Yeah.
I don't give a damn that they're running Black Lives Matter. It's just that as individuals, I find them reprehensible, and I mentioned that, so I guess that made me a racist.
Mm-hmm.
But what happened was that when the public pressure was brought to bear from the outside, that also gave the administrators a reason to back off. Because it wasn't really like they were they were going for my jugular to begin with. They were responding to pressure from within the university, from the zealots who run the social justice warrior disciplines.
That's right.
But the outside support I got from the Canadian press, once they started to actually look into what I was saying and find out that I'd actually read the stuff and wasn't just making it up, then so yes, you can appeal outside of the university, use common sense, and just say exactly what's going on. You'll find that there's a tremendous amount of public support there lurking, and so that's really worth knowing too.
One of the other things that I found is that these people are very prone to making mistakes, and I managed to set a number of traps, and it was like as if I said, excuse my indelicacy, if you will, as if I went and sat in the middle of an empty room and said, jump right in it. And they not only jumped in it, they jumped in it head first. I mean, it was like so obvious that I was setting them up. And I wasn't trying to harm them. What I was trying to do was prove what they were. And they just exemplified it perfecly.
Could you give an example of that? Like, what were these things that you were tweeting?
I wrote an article let's put it this way. There was an article written that they ascribed to me that was completely synonymous in its authorship, that critiqued the program and mentioned no names, that was about how the identity, politics, tokenism, and other factors had, in fact, eroded the integrity, eroded academic integrity considerably, as I saw it. And I said, whoever wrote this said nothing about anybody personally. There was never a name mentioned. In fact, the name of the school was changed, everything, but they took it personally and attacked me personally through official NYU email listservs that went to hundreds of people, calling me every name in the book. So they became the culpable ones. Right. I didn't do anything.
I've experienced something like that that's actually been quite astounding in my estimation. So what's happened is that over the last 8 months, the YouTube videos that I've made, both the academic ones that concentrate more on philosophical and psychological matters, and also the ones that are more politically philosophical, let's say, have found a large audience. And so now if I go out and speak somewhere and it's taped and I put that online, then I'll get 150,000 views or something like that.
That's great.
But what happens is that if the demonstrators shut me down, then that gets 350,000 to 1 million views. And all that has to happen is that it's filmed. No commentary, nothing. None of that's necessary, because every single opportunity these people have to demonstrate what they're actually like to the general population seems to discredit them further. So one of the most comical things that happened was that after I made my videos criticizing this Canadian legislation and also criticizing the University of Toronto for instituting mandatory anti-unconscious bias training for their staff, for their HR staff, which I thought and still think was reprehensible and completely unjustified by the scientific literature. There was a free speech rally that was held by students, and I was invited to speak. So I went and spoke, and my mic was taken, and they generated white noise and tried everything they could to shut me down, and the other speakers as well. And then at the end of that, a number of professional protester types, I would say, sort of cornered me and were asking me a bunch of difficult questions in a rather impolite manner. And they videotaped all of it on their cameras, and then they posted it. And I guess the idea was to discredit me. Well, it's really funny because that particular video has been watched by about 3 million people now.
Right.
And the commentary's running, I would say, 99-1 in favor of my position.
Yeah.
So it's quite interesting to see what happens when these ideas get aired to a broad audience.
The interesting thing with Brett Weinstein is they were asking him questions, and then they told him to shut up when he tried to say something. I mean, it was like, shut up, Brett, and then it was shut up, George. After they asked them questions, they actually then silenced them.
Yes, well, that's the proper role once you've been targeted. Is you just shut up and take your punishment.
Right.
Because you're a bad guy.
Right.
And you deserve it. And defense, well, you don't need to mount a defense in your behalf, because you're already the recipient of unearned privilege, and you've forgone any right you had to a defense.
Right.
And that's where we're headed legally as well. We can see that happening in Canada more and more rapidly.
One of the
There's something here.
Go ahead, John.
Something here too that's really important is that if I was a right-wing propagandist for the alt-right, I mean, I'm coming from a psychological warfare background, the first thing I would do if I was an unscrupulous actor is I would weaponize this ideology against the left, and also this can be weaponized against Muslims. I mean, this can be used in many unscrupulous ways against minorities and against the left. And this is where we need a kind of wargaming, kind of red team advisory service to say, look, this can actually be used against you. So we need a basis for conversation in which everybody can thrive. I mean, if under their ideology, someone like a white male leftist would have to sit down and shut up in the presence of Ayaan Hirsi Ali, because they don't know her lived experience. She's like a triple minority within Islam. So this is just they're inconsistent with their own ideas, and that could be exploited. The second quick thing is that trying to shut people down only increases their following on things like YouTube and within the information sphere. This creates the echo chamber reciprocity effect, where, say, the radical right and radical Islamism and the radical left feed off each other and fuel each other in this kind of reciprocal radicalization. And that only gets furthered when people try to shut them down. So this is something that if more people realize this, we might see a schism within the left when, say half of them wake up and say, you know what, maybe there's better ways to go about to, because you could appeal to this on a very consequential level.
Well, yeah, I mean, I said that myself. I said that the SJWs amounted to an alt-right generator. I mean, they were producing that which they deplore, right? I mean, I said, that was one of the first things I said in that interview. This culture is creating the alt-right in its by its way.
That's what I said too in my free speech talk. It's that I think the alt-right in some sense is a figment of the radical left's imagination, and it's a figment that's manifesting itself purely as a consequence of their maneuvering.
Exactly. I agree 100%.
But that might be okay, because it's hard to tell exactly what their end game is. I mean, their end game has been stated quite clearly, which is the inversion of Western civilization. And so, if you're trying to call forth a monster, if you're trying to call forth destruction, creating a monster on the other side is a pretty good way to start doing it. So it isn't obvious to me that this is. Did any of you guys happen to see the new National Rifle Association ad, the last one that was put out? I think it was a call to arms.
Yeah, it's a prime example of this reciprocal radicalization.
Jesus, that was just mind-boggling. That was the most that was the most obvious manifestation of this terrible polarization that I've seen yet. So I don't know if you saw it, Michael, but this beautiful woman is doing the voiceover, and in the background there's all this footage, the Antifa footage and footage from Berkeley and all those sorts of riots, which really haven't been very extensive, even by the standards, say, of the 1960s, which was, you know, a fairly tumultuous decade, but certainly not something that was going to bring civilization to its knees. But the NRA is using that footage to drive gun sales, essentially, and to tell people who are interested in arming themselves that, you know, we better get the damn guns and put them in our basement because these crazies are coming, and they're coming fast. It's like, it really shocked me.
That's scary. Also, there's videos circulating of Antifa training, undergoing training, physical training to become better militants. It's quite hilarious. It's rather laughable. I mean, not to say anything about their particular physical capabilities, but they don't look frightening at all. But it's quite funny that they're actually filming themselves undergoing this training rituals and routines now.
This almost reminds me of that first Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie where all the disaffected youth were in the Shredder's hideout skateboarding and smoking cigarettes and learning to fight. And a lot of these people clearly don't come from a martial arts or a military combatives background, and they don't understand the reality of violence, nor of the nature of trying to pull people into these, back and forth pendulum effects. And they're trying to recreate gangs of New York, and they believe that's the best way forward. And I try to tell people coming from a counterinsurgency background that, whether you're talking about the war zone in Iraq where the Shia Sunni militants would feed off each other in the same way, and I saw the effect this had on that population, or we're talking about in our inner cities, using violence to try to stamp this out is not going to work. If they believe that their enemy is racism and bigotry and Nazis, and they think the primary solution is to, use violence, they clearly have not learned lessons from multiple wars, the same wars they tend to protest.
So yes, or they have learned the lessons very well and they don't care, which I would say is more accurate, because there's no reason that we should take the claims of compassion and anti-racism and looking out for the underdog seriously. I mean, because one of the things that seems to me to be absolutely self-evident is that if you have even a vague familiarity with the history of the 20th century, you can't both be a Marxist and be compassionate for the underdog, because we know bloody well what happened when Marxism was implemented as a political strategy in multiple countries. It's like, it was plenty of people died, and they died very badly, and it wasn't good for any underdogs at all. So I think the whole idea that the whole notion that any of this is driven by genuine compassion is especially on the radical end, it's like it's power masquerading as compassion.
Right. I mean, if you scrape the surface of their so-called egalitarianism, the tyrannical, totalitarian, layers are immediately.
Well, you can see that visible by the way they treat Ayaan Hirsi Ali. It's like she should be a poster girl for the radical left, for God's sake. Like you said, she's a triple threat minority. God, she had female genital mutilation. She ran away from arranged marriage. The bloody woman's a heroine. I mean, genuinely, she is. And this is independent of what you think about what she thinks about Islam.
Right.
It's like she's a tough cookie. And
that's
the fact that the social justice warriors are protesting against her, it's like, okay, now we see what you're about. Because if you think that Ayaan Hirsi Ali is your enemy, we know who your friends are.
Yeah, I've talked to her, and she's actually a really nice person if you actually talk to her. But and one thing is, Michael and I sort of founded this exchange-based project. One of the aims is to try to show more people that are kind of on the fence, more people that tend to lean left and they really care about compassion and they care about justice, that they need the lexicon and the tools and the space to do it in a way that doesn't involve ideology and dogma and this kind of visceral tribalism. So one thing we're trying to show is that ideology and radical dogma should not have a monopoly on human compassion or how we expand our empathy circle. Ideology should not monopolize justice. You do not need purple hair or radical dogma to engage in a real genuine form of justice for other human beings, in the same way that you don't be fundamentalist religious to meditate. So this is something we want to show people through example and through bringing the tools together. And if it's okay with the two of you, we could talk a little bit about the idea of exchange spaces and how this could be replicated and what some of the tools are. I mean, I know Michael and I had a cup of coffee and talked about it. We both brought on different people we know from our our circle, and including a clinical psychologist undergrad who's really good, and
graduate
people
student,
with
yeah.
different backgrounds. Yeah, and then there's a lot of ways these backgrounds can really converge and create kind of an A-team or a Avengers of academia, if you want to call it that can be duplicated in different campus environments. And I think that's the key thing. And my analogy is that in the military, you have, for example, village stability operations and tribal engagement, where small teams, whether it's Green Berets or other human terrain teams, whatever, can embed in a village, wear the local attire, understand the culture, and they can train and equip the locals to farm or to fight or to shoot. Well, in this case, we're not teaching people to farm or to shoot. We're just equipping them with the tools to create these alternative platforms of dialogue. And this can bring in moral psychology, it can bring in some of the tools we used overseas, and it can also even bring in cybersecurity. I know a lot of people in hacktivism, so if someone's getting death threats or harassment, we have ways to deal with that. And I think this really is also a way to interconnect people so they don't feel so isolated. And this can prevent people from being radicalized. This can actually save lives if we scale this up in parts of London, for example.
And for, we chose the name exchange spaces as against the idea of safe spaces, that we should have spaces where things are actually interchanged, not that we're insulated from.
So what's your vision for that? Like, how would that work practically?
I'll leave that to John.
Sure. Yeah, so basically, we're going to start with the idea is that we have a basic working document. We'll send that out, but we want to do a friendly test run with a predominantly friendly crowd, probably somewhere here in New York City. And we're going to go around introducing our respective backgrounds and talk about the idea, and then try to do an interactive sort of participatory workshop to demonstrate the concept. The next phase would be to do an actual pilot project, ideally on a campus. So I've talked to student groups and people that are very interested in this idea. And then as we do that, we do a test run, and then we can slowly start to build it in the same way you have an incubator for video games. We can incubate dialogue.
Yeah.
So one example is we did it. Michael and I had different panels at the Left Forum. So the Left Forum, you might actually like this. Well, it is basically the mecca for the left. Every year they do this in New York City at John Jay. So I set up 3 different panels, and Michael jumped on another one. And one of the panels, all 3 of them were controversial. I did one on Black Lives Matter and police, and I actually facilitated a good conversation between a senior citizen in Red Hook, an African-American lady friend of mine, and a retired police captain who's very pro-reform. Another panel was on how the left can talk about Islam and defend ex-Muslims while defending Muslims from bigotry and show them how to walk that tightrope, give them the tools. And these panels actually went really well. And on Michael's panel, if you see the recording, chairs almost flew, and that was a little different story. But
I just gave all I did is I did a genealogy of certain techniques of the social justice left. And I traced most of them back to Maoism. I mean, autocritique and struggle circles. All these things like privilege checking. They all go back to this.
Stuff that went so well, except for the 100 million dead people.
That's right.
Yeah.
No,
and that one went off the rails, did it?
Well, not because of me. What I said was purely historical. They couldn't touch it. There was a guy at the end, one commentator, who asked a provocative question. So you will allow Nazis to speak, and we all said yes. We would allow Nazis to speak because that's not our role, or we are not the arbiters of all speech. I mean, that's just not where we.
Well, also not the arbiter of who gets called a Nazi.
That's for.
It's like, okay, fine. Nazis don't get to speak, but we have to identify them with 100% certainty. Well, there's the rub.
Right.
Who the hell is going to do that?
Exactly.
Because everybody and their dog is a Nazi now. They disagree with the radical left, and their dog. You saw that what happened to that guy in England who trained his dog to give the Hitler salute. I don't know if you saw that.
I didn't see that one.
It's a very interesting side story. He actually got arrested for it and spent a night in jail because of it. It was clearly a joke, a satire.
That ended up in a shouting match with the guy calling one of the panel organizer garbage and just basically pure epithets. But I thought I'd get away with scot-free. This guy acted as a more or less foil, which I didn't really want to put him in that position, but it's how it worked out. But one of the things I wanted to say, Jordan, is one other thing is, what about a support network for other beleaguered, professors, but also students who are, are besieged by this? and having a space where they can locate online and then connect with real people in the world.
Well, Jonathan Haidt's doing that to some degree, I would say, with the Heterodox Academy. We
want to build on that model to some degree.
Yeah.
Certainly.
I feel that it's. I don't want to critique him. I actually know him, and we've met, and he's been very supportive. But I don't like the exclusivity towards the two professors. And I don't know what they're doing. I don't see the action. I want to see real networks that are, that people can really.
We probably need half a dozen different ways of doing this, and then let the market sort out which one's going to work.
Okay.
I can tell you one of the things I'm working on right now, which I think is extraordinarily comical. So, about 3 weeks ago, I did a YouTube video and mentioned that I had been making a postmodern lexicon. So I've been, trying to determine. By going through a lot of postmodern writing, what the words are that are most emblematic of that ideologically predicated thinking, and that inspired. I was just doing that by hand, it was just a first pass approximation.
Sure.
But that inspired a computer programmer to develop an AI system that can now parse postmodern from non-postmodern text. And so he set up a website. Yeah, this is so cool, man. He set up a website where students will be able to go and enter a course description into the website. And it will tell the student not only if it's postmodern or not, but the degree to which it's postmodern.
Wow.
And it'll be categorizable by professor, discipline, and school. And so I'm going to produce some videos in August describing the postmodern cult to parents of high school students and to high school students and to university freshmen, and promoting this website so that they can go in there and say, look, if you want to go to university and get educated, if you want to go to university and become a postmodern cult devotee, then you can take the courses that are identified as such. But if you want to avoid that cult indoctrination and actually get an education, then just go use this website and avoid all the courses and professors who have gone down this pathological route.
That's excellent. So
I'm hoping we can, because I thought for a while I was promoting the idea in Canada that the universities who don't come out in support of free speech, like the University of Chicago, have their funding cut. And also maybe that the universities overall suffer a nice 25% in funding cut so that they can fight over the remnants and clean themselves up. But the problem is that if you get the government involved in policing university, then there's all sorts of terrible things that are going to come out of that. They're not going to be the good things that you hope. They're going to be a bunch of awful things.
Right.
And so I thought instead one of the better strategies would be to cut off their supply chain. And the supply chain is basically students. And so to educate students before they're at university, as well as their parents, and say, look, this isn't what you want for your kids. This isn't what you want for yourself. Here's how to avoid it. So that'll be launched in August.
That's an excellent application. It reminds me of what was going on when I was at Carnegie Mellon. I worked in a robotics institute while I was undergoing my PhD studies, and we were dealing with these very things, this text mining, and text mining that could identify various generic qualities and text, sort them into, is this a narrative, is this a poem, is this
right.
So that's great stuff.
Yeah, well, it's also nice that obviously the output is dependent to some degree on the training input, so there's a bit of human judgment there, but it's nice that the system will more or less be able to do this in at least a semi-automated fashion. It'll pull the human administrator issue out of the question to some degree.
Well, we would love to link to that from the Exchange Space site as a tool, that we would very much promote. I think that would be great.
Yeah. I'd like to see maybe we could get lucky and knock the damn enrollment in these things down by 75% in the next 3 or 4 years. That'd be absolutely comical. I'd laugh about that for about a year.
The thing is, you'd probably see some of these professors getting away with having 1 and 2 students per class and still getting paid their full salaries.
Yeah, well, look, once the professors are in the institution, it's very, very, very difficult to do anything about that. And perhaps that's the way it should be, because it offers protection for people like you, for example, and for people like me, for that matter. So there's always a price in error to be paid for good policy, but they're not going to get away with it forever.
Right. And that might affect hiring procedures in the future.
Well, especially in the private places in the U.S. is like in the public universities, it's a little bit rougher because there's no direct relationship between, say, enrollment and tenure. But in the private institutions, especially the really radical postmodern institutions, if they start to take a really good body blow because nobody's coming to their institutions anymore, they'll reform real quick. I mean, I know this has happened to University of Missouri already to some degree. I know that because of what happened there, especially after that demonstration where the journalism professor was calling for some extra heavy muscle. I know that their enrollment has really taken a hit.
Right.
And there's no reason that can't happen on a very broad scale.
I think Evergreen State is going to have that problem as well.
Yes, well, with any luck, they will.
Yeah.
Yes, because there's an institution that deserves to have it happen as fast as possible.
Exactly.
Of course, they have an almost completely non-selective admissions process, so
right.
they're a little bit harder to. Institutions like that are a little bit harder to rein in because they basically generate a market by allowing pretty much anybody to come in and to claim the, let's say, the privileges of a post-high school education.
One of the funny things I wanted to run by real quick is, if possible, is the student who applied to Stanford, whose main purpose, essay of purpose or whatever they call it, consisted of the replication of hashtag Black Lives Matter 100 times, and was not only accepted but was accepted with with a great deal of fanfare. It just shows me that, look, they're willing to say, we're fine with having a student body that is willing to just be phrase repeaters at various events. And, it's exactly what goes on in these talks where Charles Murray and other people are shot. What's that?
No, they're not really fine with it. They want to promote it actively.
Yeah.
I mean, that's exactly the hallmark of an ideologically possessed group. Is it's not education, it's inculcation. And
Absolutely.
The thing that's so terrible about the postmodernists is you can actually learn the whole doctrine in about a week. There's only about 20 axioms, and
right.
Once you've got them down, you can generate endless postmodern content.
Yeah.
So, which is exactly what the humanities scholars who are publishing this sort of thing do, because
right.
they publish papers that have 80% of them have a citation count of 0.
Right.
So,
wow. What do you guys think of this as well? What do you think of the idea of having, this could be an app for a phone, it could be something used among students and professors. It could be sort of a logic map, ways to respond to fallacies, but also links to emotionally effective communication. And it could be videos of some of these tools. It could be role-playing discussions between people, so they're not just talking at cross points. For example, people come in with the word political correctness, and if you're on the left, that might mean something different to you than it does to me. As soon as I delineate what the word means, it becomes easier for us to talk. And there's often ways you can diffuse their concerns by showing common ground and empathy. And these tools of emotional connection and also using logic to debunk fallacies and bullshit could be used, brought to bear through phone apps, through ways you can get people interconnected. And this could include actual YouTube videos where people have a coming out campaign, where people on the left who are dissatisfied and privately know that there's problems on the left can come out honestly and speak about it. I call this an incubator for self-reflection.
Mm-hmm.
It creates that positive domino effect of kind of lifts the curtain of pluralistic ignorance.
Well, John, partly first of all, I would say that would be something, as a goal, I would say that would be something to contact the emerging free speech clubs about.
Absolutely.
Because there's lots they're growing like mad. And so, but then the other thing I would point out is, that's actually what students were supposed to be educated in doing when they went to university.
In the first place.
Like basically what you're doing is teaching students how to engage in debate. And that they're supposed to learn that, but they haven't learned it. So this is also why I think the humanities are ripe for a YouTube takeover, because they've abandoned that intellectual property. Obviously, people need to be taught how to debate civilly.
Yes, they're even losing the ability to articulate words. I mean, if you look at that Evergreen State College aftermath, and some of the protests, basically devolved into grunting. I mean, they didn't have they couldn't even articulate sentences or phonemes. I mean, it was really outrageous.
I saw this at McMaster. They basically, the student protesters came out to drown me out, and all they fundamentally did, they had about 10 cliches that they yelled at me, 8 or so of which were 70% profanity. And it was so unsophisticated, even as a what would you call a protest technique.
Yeah.
It's like, really, that's the best you can do.
It's bad propaganda. I mean, terrible propaganda.
So teaching people how to debate is a fine idea, and to use YouTube to do that is a fine idea. And to also point out to people that when they're doing this is that you're actually teaching them to think. You've got to give your opponent some credit, because otherwise, if you have built up an ideology in your own mind and you're ready to defend it, and let's say it's actually one that serves you well, just for the sake of argument, you should be able to take an extremely powerful opponent, give their argument its due, and defeat it.
Exactly.
Well, they're not being.
Which is exactly how I teach. It's exactly how I teach writing. I mean, if you can't deal with the counter arguments, if you don't even go out of your way to find out what the counter arguments are and then deal with them and rebut them, then you aren't making an argument. You're just.
Well, you're not writing.
No, you're not writing.
It's like a huge part of writing is. I mean, when I'm writing, I don't know what it's like for you, but when I'm writing, I write down a sentence and then I try to think of 10 reasons why it's wrong.
Exactly.
And if I can't, and I mean solid, powerful reasons, if the sentence can't withstand my best attempts to chop it off at the knees, then it isn't a sentence worth retaining.
Yeah.
And yes, and that's the sort of thing that students were supposed to be taught in the damn humanities.
What do you guys think about the idea of essentially working in low-income neighborhoods and communities with mixed demographic population and showing how the tools of Socratic discussion and debate, but also the tools of compassion, can actually be a more powerful way to tackle issues of justice within that neighborhood and really create that space to show how that. And I've talked to numerous people in parts of Brooklyn where I've been engaged in since Hurricane Sandy, including people who, African Americans have lived there since the days of Dr. King. And a lot of them are extremely receptive to this idea and deeply hungry for learning.
Look, man, anything you can do to teach people how to formulate their arguments in an articulate manner and to exchange viewpoints peacefully. It's like more power to you.
Yeah.
That's the alternative. It's the alternative to tyranny and slavery. Is reasoned argument and negotiation. So I mean, I think it sounds extraordinarily difficult. And there'll be roadblocks of all sorts that emerge that you won't initially imagine, but it's certainly an endeavor worth pursuing.
Jordan, one other thing I wanted to ask you is that, is if you would be willing, or I don't want to put you on the spot, but what we're thinking about is creating a collection, right, of a page that links out to what we're calling sort of amusingly the Avengers of the Academy, so to speak, so that there's a one-stop shop where people that want to know what these critics are saying can go to and go and branch out from there.
Well, I mean, the devil's always in the details, but given what we've outlined so far, it seems to me that anything that would facilitate the what would you say, the provision of more information to the consumer population, let's say that's potential students, and also anything that would arm people better with regards to their ability to articulate and formulate arguments. It's like,
right.
And I also think there's absolutely no reason to do that inside the universities.
No.
Because it would just be difficult. You can just do it using the social media techniques that are already available, and you circumvent all the administrative problems.
And we become a force of our own to be reckoned with, and therefore they have to respond. In effect, eventually they'll have to respond. Hopefully, by changing. Hopefully.
Yes. Well, so that seems that, and it's going to take a lot of experimentation, online experimentation, to find out which of these techniques really work and which will find an audience and how to go about doing it. But there's the reach of the technologies is so spectacular and the relative cost so low that there's just absolutely no reason not to try doing this, especially because it's interesting. I mean, if you could figure out a way to make opposing people negotiate more effectively, and that was, what would you call, scalable? Well, hey, there's a good problem to solve.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I've done it a few times. It's deeply satisfying. It's just a matter of systemizing it, doing a few pilot runs, showing it works, and equipping people with the tools. And we're definitely going to.
I would say the Free Speech Club should be all over that. Because they're the clubs that see that they're the clubs too. Is that they need mentors that teach them how to debate.
Yes. I also think that there should be space, part of this Exchange Spaces site, which may link to Avengers of the Academy or whatever. We need to have narratives from professors, from students that are collected and in one place or linking to several other places.
I think that's probably something that will become self-organizing. That would be my guess. Because, for example, while we've done this video today, and I talked to a professor last week from Ryerson who's been harassed by the accommodation sheriffs And that's a whole other nest of worms that nobody's managed to tackle so far. But like every time a video like this is made and it has some success, the probability that 3 other ones are going to be made goes up.
Great.
So I think by moving forward with your plans, that'll happen organically, and that's the right. And then, of course, you can certainly arrange to serve as a central clearinghouse for that kind of information.
Yeah.
Look here, look here, look here.
Yeah, that's what we're hoping.
Fine.
Yeah. Reaching out to different layers. Like, there's not therapy, but like support networks, literature networks, YouTube videos, just various forms of information and also support, and just as the most horrible thing that this SJW culture tries to perpetrate is the sense of total and utter isolation on the part of the victim.
Yeah, well, that's right. They did this to journalists in Canada very effectively recently with the cultural appropriation issues. What happens is they do the same things that lions do when they try to take a zebra out of a herd, is they isolate one individual and then attack them as a pack. And what needs to happen is there need to be avenues for people who are attacked like that to reach out for support. Yes. There are some organizations like FIRE in the U.S. that have done a pretty good job of that.
Yes.
But yes.
Yeah. That's strictly legal. I think that's great. I think it's great, but I think there's obviously more layers than the legal elements.
Yes, and there's no reason just to do it legally. It should be done culturally.
That's right.
So were there other things? I should head off here pretty quick, guys. Is there anything else that you guys wanted to talk about?
No, I think we've hit it all, Jordan. I think we've really hit it all, and really appreciate your time. I know how busy you are.
Hey, it's my pleasure. It's my pleasure. Look, I think that, first of all, this needs to be done because, well, it's worth watching that NRA video.
Okay.
That's a sign of things to come if this isn't sorted out, and it needs to be sorted out. And the universities are not doing their job. In fact, they're destabilizing the entire damn culture.
They are,
and they're burdening an entire generation with accumulated debt while failing to educate them, while destabilizing the culture. It's like, enough is enough. It's time to take the damn.
How much money are they charging them to be indoctrinated? It's incredible.
Yes, exactly. No kidding. $100,000 bill to be indoctrinated. You don't even learn to speak. You don't learn to read. You learn to regard yourself as a victim and to think of the world as a place of nothing but competing power hierarchies. It's appalling.
Yes.
It is. And one parting note, too, is, Jordan, I told Dave Rubin this down in Maryland recently and others. I'm going to reach out to student veterans. There's a lot of veterans that would be very good at doing this, would find a lot of meaning in doing it. We're used to getting with screaming Iraqis, talking to each other. We definitely do it with screaming college kids, but also, there's a lot of skeptics, especially in scientific thinkers and clubs like that here in New York City. And I'm well connected in that community and across the country. So we're trying to get them involved as well and see.
Just don't use the word reason. That's the only thing I have to say. Be careful with that.
Yeah, no, it's fine. Like, what's the downside? Downside is some use of your time, and you're going to learn a lot doing it anyways.
Yeah.
The upside is that you'll be able to create some tools that'll help people engage in dialogue. And like, we can either help people talk to each other, or we can wait for them to capitulate or fight, because those are the options.
That's right.
So you either capitulate to or fight with people you can't speak to. So, and I'm not very happy about the idea of going down either of those routes.
Yeah,
okay.
Thank you so much, Jordan. It was been great to talk to you. We really appreciate it.
Talk to both of you too, and good luck with your plans.
Thank you so much.
Let me know what's happening with the video, and I'll tweet it when
I post it. Great. Thank you. Great. We'll do so. Thank you very much.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.